Invisible code is already making a lot of decisions for you, whether you know it or not. The question is, who really benefits from it? You or someone else? That's what we're going to discuss today here on Legitimate Cybersecurity. Thanks for joining. My name is Frank Downs. As always, I have Dustin Brewer with me. And there's been a lot of stuff in the news recently, and let's be honest, over the last few years about the different types of code that kind of guides our day-to-day business, right? And I think it's really interesting because, Dustin, for example, the phrase I like to apply for this type of situation that you hear a lot is, if you're not paying, you're probably the product. And I think that has been kind of highlighted a lot in a lot of these free to use services that have been changing subtly over the years. And this has become kind of dubious when it comes to the intentions of organizations that provide these codes. For example, I don't know if TikTok is ever going to leave the United States despite a whole, act of Congress saying it should, because the whole implication there is that it is conducting some kind of psyops warfare against everyone in the United States on behalf of China. Now, whether that's true or not, I haven't seen anything that has specifically pointed it out. However, I can say that we've seen a lot of examples, and even with our podcast here, we're given a lot of leverage on how we can kind of influence organizations and influence people, right? And I kind of wanted to discuss that today and pick your brain because, we'll start with TikTok. Do you think, Dustin, that they're showing us just things that we like, or do you think there is some kind of nefarious goal for an organization like TikTok when they're deciding what we see and how we see it?
Yeah, maybe nefarious isn't the right word, at least not yet. I think that the data collected could potentially be used for nefarious purposes if it fell into the wrong hands. And look, you can talk about TikTok all you want, but let's talk about Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, right? Something that we knew where, oh, wow, the data fell into the hands of the wrong people, right? Or the wrong governments, or however you want to kind of pose it. And look, TikTok is a company that's owned by a Chinese entity, which means that the Chinese government has a stake in it, right? Meaning that, the Chinese government can go in there anytime they want and take the data out of there and use it for whatever they want to use it for, right? And everybody's like, well, who cares about that? Like, what are they really going to get from me? But look, it's the same argument that we use for every technology, where it's like, you and I both have had our personal data for the past 10 years of our life, and actually probably closer to 15 or 20 years of our life, be completely taken away from us because of the OPM breach, right?
In the most intimate way, too, because those 6 forms are probably the most comprehensive forms you can fill out about your life, where you've lived, how long you've lived there, who you know, what they know, things along those lines. And all of those are compromised during the OPM hack. You make a really good point.
So, and to for those of you who don't know SF-86 or any of that, that's basically the form you fill out to get any kind of clearance within the United States, whether it be secret, top secret. I think that's it. There's probably one more. I can think of one more, but I'm not sure.
There's a couple others that we probably shouldn't discuss.
Right, a couple others that we probably shouldn't discuss. But those get you your kind of base level entry into clearances into classified material in the United States. With that, they kind of ask you to go back in your life like 10, 15 years and put down everybody you knew, everywhere you lived, how many drugs you did. It gets into what your credit score is, why your credit score is what it is. There's a lot of information in there, right? And so both Frank and I were part of the intelligence community when there was a big hack that happened with the Office of Personnel Management in the United States. And I believe it was attributed to China, right? It was the Chinese national.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I don't know. I think if you look it up on Wikipedia, it'll say that. Let's just put it that way. So anyway, look, the data was stolen by possibly a foreign government, which means that all of our information is gone, right? What can they use that for? Probably a lot if they really wanted to. I think even biometrics, like our fingerprints, are part of that, right? Part of that hack. So it's a really scary thing to think about. When you talk about things like consumer information, it's interesting to think about, and interesting to think about what they could use. One of the headlines that I just skimmed was somebody purchased data gathered from numerous sources that had geolocation data, and they tracked phones, or they tracked digital identities to Epstein's Island, right? And so they have all these phones, and they've been able to see like where these people lived and, what their residents were because of where they spent most of their time, but then that they flew to Jeffrey Epstein's Island. So
same thing with Congress. John Oliver did that with Congress as well. He did an entire episode having bought information from data brokers to identify who was who in Congress and what they were searching and what they were looking up. It was pretty interesting. And then he ended the episode by threatening to release it. It was one of my favorites.
Yeah. So look, there's a lot you can do with this data. You don't think about it, and we don't think about it. And why should you have to? That's why most countries, including China, have a privacy law that usually protects the citizens from commercial gathering of this type of data. The United
Not
States
us, by the way.
does not have a federal law. We have the California Consumer Protection Act, which protects consumers in California. So if you live in California, congratulations. If you live in any one of the other 49 states or 50 territories and states, territory and state, then too bad. We just don't have privacy laws. And look, so that's kind of where I stand on it. I understand that. I understand that, like, why do we care? Why would I care as a teenager? Why do I care? I'm just going to put a bunch of funny stuff on TikTok and get my friends to follow me, and we'll have discussions, and it'll be fun. It's a fun time. But you really don't think about the ramifications of, like, well, then they're also collecting my location data. They're also collecting who I'm hanging out with. They're collecting where I'm going, and they're building what we would call like a baseball card, or they're building like kind of this profile on you as an individual. It's a digital profile. Maybe they know your name, maybe they don't. They probably do. And so that's kind of where we're at. Frank, what do you, where do you kind of stand on that?
I think it's really interesting because it's happening in a lot of ways that are really hard to learn about. It's not that they are illegally hiding what they're doing with this information. Sure. Yeah. It's just that they are not required to advertise it or inform you. The best example that I like to use is LexisNexis has become basically a shadow credit agency, and that they have built up all this information and all these soft requests and other key data points. LexisNexis has relationships with data brokers who collect information from GM. GM collects information on your driving habits, how fast you're going, how abrupt your stops are, and so forth. And now you can opt out of this, but it takes a level of effort, right? And you have to really be paying attention to it. This information is then turned around and sold to the insurance companies, the car insurance companies, so they can justify reasons for increasing your premiums. Keep in mind, they'll raise your premiums no matter what, and they'll tell you
right.
You like it, right? But then I often wonder too, there's also the way they subtly sculpt our day. And this is what really starts to get a little concerning, right? I'll use the example of Google in this instance having Google Maps and Waze. And I'm sure that with our discussions here, there's going to be, we're totally going to be pushed down for our views, and it's going to be really hard for people to find this content. But like, I will say this, Google probably has some of the best, if they have the best opportunity to have some of the most complete profiles on everybody, right? And when you're driving using Google Maps or Waze, right, it's a good question. If Google's routing you to Starbucks instead of Dunkin' because of ad spend as you're driving, right, and they make sure that your route takes you by a Starbucks. I know if we go by a Starbucks, especially on a long drive, my wife's going to want some, right? Is that a bad thing? Is that convenience, or is that manipulation at that point? I wonder, is it because of ad spend, or because it knows what I like and it knows what the people in the vehicle like? And I think there's a subtle level of influence there. I mean, there's a macro level of influence there as well that I think is worth investigating. Now, we'll never know, right? Unless there is, legal discovery and it comes out through that, or there is any kind of compulsory admission. But it's interesting, I think, because we have now entered an era that it can be reversed, but I think we're all going to be quite miserable if it does reverse for a lot of reasons. Where is it convenience? And this gets back to we're the product, right? Are you routing me by a Dunkin' Donuts or a Starbucks? Is it based on my preference, or is it based on ad spend, or is it both? Are you saying to Dunkin', hey, we can increase the amount of people who drive by, so pay us? Or are you saying, hey, we can make people drive by, so pay us? Or is it both? I mean, if you're going to be savvy about it, you'll do both, right? In that instance. So I think it's really interesting in that regard. Also, you have other examples, right, where the influence is subtle, such as Amazon, whenever I'm searching on Amazon, right? And all of the sponsored, results are first. And the buy now buttons, they can present information in many different ways, where the buy now is a lot easier, where the sponsored annotation is small, and even shipping's quicker, right? For certain items. I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but it is something that we are experiencing now. And so it kind of builds into the next one, like who does this? Who are the people that do it? I mean, there's a couple of like real world examples that I looked up before we started. You've got OpenAI's ChatGPT acknowledged to have emergent behaviors that even engineers can't explain. And you have Facebook whistleblowers that revealed algorithms are pushing divisive content for engagement. And boy, I don't know about you, but my Facebook engagement has changed dramatically. I don't know. It's almost as if something happened over the last 8 to 9 months where suddenly Facebook has been more of a consumption tool rather than an engagement tool. But that's only for me. It just wants to show me things that it thinks I'll want to see to try and keep me on there. And admittedly, my time on Facebook has been less. Whereas I'm convinced other people have a completely different experience where, they're being shown things that intentionally make them angry. Dude, I honestly think at this point with Facebook, they know which people who can see my profile and are configured certain ways to just send them and show them stuff. And they know that if they make them angry, they'll just start engaging because that's all I want at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
Especially now with the reporting mechanisms being stripped. And now it's more like Twitter. So I don't know. Dustin, if even OpenAI's engineers are admitting that something's afoot here, I mean, who do we trust at that point to filter things? Can we trust anyone? Like, can you use the internet in a way that you think is safe from these algorithms who influence us in a lot of ways we don't even know?
So first off, I'm gonna take this in two parts. The first part is because I've worked in software dev before, I can definitively tell you that every single piece of code ever written does things that the programmer didn't intend it to do.
True.
And I think this just breaks it down once again into the fact that AI is not what everybody thinks it is. It is an algorithm. It is written by programmers. It's a very complex and a very unique and a very useful tool for the most part. But somebody today actually came to me and was complaining about the output and how terrible it was and how much it had hallucinated.
It was me.
It was you. And look, using something like AI as like a search engine or something like that, a very baseline first step research tool is great. No more than, Google or anything else that you would use. And of course, I moved away from Google too, because anytime you search for anything, the first 10 results are going to be sponsored results, which means they're advertisements.
That's correct.
It's terrible. It's awful. It's not even worth using. Go use DuckDuckGo instead. It's private. It uses a very similar algorithm to Google, and there's not a whole lot of ads on it, if any. I don't think there's any ads actually. So we're seeing this kind of like rebirth of open source again, because everybody's like, wow, these things are collecting a lot of information on us. The second part of your question, I forgot.
Is there anything we can trust to filter the world, right? Is there any way we can interact with the internet and all these algorithms that leave us with a level of agency that we can feel that we're in control? I mean, now you and I know ways to do that, but the convenience is so outstripped in my experience that I don't want it. I mean, we can use things like DuckDuckGo. We can live life on tour. We can do these types of things, right? But it's a miserable existence. And I know, what's that? Ben Franklin said, anyone who gives up security or freedom for security deserves neither, right? It's almost like anyone who gives up, freedom for convenience or agency for convenience. I mean, come on. But also, I think in certain perspectives that mentality is a bit antiquated when there's no option. And the example I give you for no option is Facebook creates profiles on people that don't use Facebook. And it's almost, the example I like to use is Batman movie, The Dark Knight, the 2008 release, where at the end he finds Joker by turning on everyone's phones and, Gotham City, and can ping and find them. When you have something like Facebook where it's on everyone's phones and it can listen to room audio and it can recognize a voice that doesn't have a Facebook account and it can slowly build profiles on people. I don't like using the embrace the void mentality, but like, unless you're going out to the wilderness and living on the land.
Yeah.
I don't know what the option is. Why not take the level of convenience that's there?
Right. Where's the demarcation of, the balance that you need to strike, right? And I think that's the answer is that you need to strike a balance. And you do need to, I think it's more important for people to understand, like the TikTok example, like what it is you're giving up, right? I think as long as you understand that, you truly understand it, and you decide to go with it anyways, and that's your choice. That's fine. I don't think there's anything, if you want to live life that way, then that's totally fine. Now, as far as the level of manipulation that happens with these, we've had advertisements for years, right? You and I grew up in a generation where we would watch Saturday morning cartoons and we knew what we wanted for Christmas because there was only a few toys that were being advertised on, in between during the commercial breaks, right? And so we kind of knew what we wanted, but did we know what we wanted? You know what I mean? Like, would we have wanted something else if we had more choices? But so, tobacco, not being allowed to have radio and TV commercials anymore, only being allowed to have advertisements in Playboy, basically, or in magazines like that. That's the kind of level of like restriction for certain things that we'd be looking at. And I understand the need for regulation. I understand the need for restrictions for certain things. When you have an algorithm that can tell you more about yourself than you know or than anybody else would possibly know,
Yeah.
then there's a shift there. There's a shift of balance that's happening between uh, there's a shift in power, right? In your willpower and the power of something else to be able to manipulate you without you maybe even knowing it. Sometimes with you knowing it, but sometimes without you even knowing it. And so that is a question that we as a society need to answer, and we're really not equipped to answer it right now. Instead, we're just kind of full bore going into the void of AI and
Sure are.
whatever next, right? Which is interesting. Like it's almost like we're not prepared for this level of what we're doing. And look, I've said this a couple of times. I don't want to be the old man shaking his fist at a new technology and saying this technology is going to ruin society. I don't necessarily believe that, but I do think we are at a place where technology, AI algorithms are starting to do things that the programmer didn't expect it to do. Again, that happens all the time in programming. It's not just AI algorithms. Um, should we be kind of taking a step back and looking at ourselves? And look, we had early warnings about this. Is not new. We've had a Google AI be Google image recognition be racist. We've had Amazon AI, HR AI be sexist and racist.
We had XAI become Mecha Hitler.
That's right. Just recently. That's right. So we've had these, but this was like 5 or 6 years ago with the Google and the AWS stuff. So we had an early warning about this, and I've written about this before, where it's like if you're thinking about AI, and you can say, oh well, the programmers need to program the algorithms better. Okay, but what it really is the data that it's getting is from us. So it's not really that Amazon's HR AI was racist and sexist. Turns out that the data that they were using to train it was racist and sexist. So we're looking now at, ourselves under a microscope because we're the trainer. We are the proud parents of a brand new form of intelligence, right?
Proud is is doing a lot of heavy lifting there.
Regardless of whether you want it or not, Jerry Springer's sitting here telling you, Frank, that it's yours. Sorry. Congratulations. It's a boy or a girl, or it's just an AI.
Brother,
and so
just wait. And it's going to start in Japan because they already marry their avatars. They're going to have babies, and those babies are going to be AIs. And I'm not ready for that.
And I'm not paying for their health care.
Well, that's a good example, though, right? That's a great example with healthcare, right? You now have AI algorithms that can identify tumors better than doctors, better than technicians. And so it is kind of getting weird, like with all of these trade-offs, of giving our souls away, as it were. We're getting these benefits of more rapid, enhanced medical capabilities, for example. I really like the example. I just got a bunch of tests performed. I'll say back in February. And before the doctor was able to get back to me, I was able to put those into AI and figure out what it meant. And it was really helpful. So here's the question that comes out of it then. If we're getting these capabilities, and I will say have the potential to level set things like healthcare in the United States. Healthcare is an incredibly broken system, although I would also suggest other nations have their own struggles with healthcare. For some reason, taking care of each other is just something that is hard for all of us. A lot of thoughts with that one. But if it has the capability here is that it can level set things like healthcare, do the ends justify the means? Is it worth it? Is it worth what we're sacrificing right now for our knowledge, our personalities, parts of us, arguably our souls, right? If we can save lives quicker for people who don't have access to certain levels of healthcare, so they can kind of understand test results when they have a doctor and they have terrible insurance that takes weeks to get back to them, right? Where time is of the essence. I don't know. But what do you think? Yeah. Enjoy that one.
Look, AI is still being trained by us, right? So the fact that it's able to kind of detect certain things earlier is only because of the hard scientific work and medical work that has come before it. Not saying that it can't do new stuff, right? Not saying that it can't, possibly find new detections for things. One of my favorite things that I just learned about, man, I wish I could remember the name of the disease, but it's a degenerative disease like Parkinson's or,
One of your favorite things you learned about is a degenerative disease. Please continue.
Hold on.
I know.
There's more to it. So this nurse who worked with a lot of Parkinson's patients, or a lot of people who had this disease, I can't remember the name of it. She went to a conference with a bunch of doctors, and they were talking about new treatments and new detection. And she raised her hand during one of the Q&As, and she was like, "Hey, why do they all have kind of this like very specific smell that's coming off their body? It's not unpleasant, but it's just a specific smell."
Yeah, I read about this too.
Yeah, and they were like, we don't, but there was as a good scientist would, I've never heard of that. And, he went back and did some research and found out that there was no such thing, and kind of just wrote it off until he was able to get the money via marketing to try to run a trial and see if this woman could detect, these smells. She ended up being 100% precise with they gave her like swabs of sweat from people with the disease, without the disease.
Her name's Joy Milne.
100% accuracy. From that, they were able to distill, sweat from sweat glands of people who had the disease, and find these markers, find these chemicals that were coming off these folks who had this disease. And she actually was able to identify the disease before it had manifested within somebody. And so now there's early tests for things like that. That's something.
And you're not wrong, by the way, with the degenerative disease, because the reason you had a hard time with it was because she can smell multiple diseases and cancers and has been able to identify markers through the sense.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing, right? And that's a human trait. Not saying that we can't train an AI to smell. There are definitely, sensors and receptors and electronic sensors and receptors for smell and whatnot. But that's kind of like that's very futuristic down the road. But the ingenuity and the kind of the notice of the pattern finding, the noticing of patterns with things, and again, not something that AI necessarily can't do, but that's a very specific human thing that happened there with that early detection, that capability. One of the things with COVID, when it first came out, there was an AI that was monitoring, sicknesses around the world, and it was actually able to, it was like, hey, something's going on in China. Like, I think months before China had ever said like, oh yeah, we got something going on here. There's a new sickness going around. There was an AI that like just with like news articles and noticing like patterns, like it was able to say, I think there's like a pandemic.
Something's up in the 100-acre wood.
Yeah, there's a pandemic in China, or not pandemic in China, but there's some kind of
an event
going around in China that hasn't been identified yet. And so yeah, there's tools, and it's great to have these things, because as humans, like, we can't do the number of calculations that these things can do, that these can do, right? Which is great. I did have a buddy early on kind of talk to me about AI, and he was like, but it'll find things that you can't find. Like, it'll notice patterns that you won't notice. And I'm like, good, but correlation is not always causation. There's a lot more that kind of goes into everything than just like finding patterns. So that's where the specifically human traits, I feel like, come in. So I do feel like AI as a diagnostic tool, great, as long as we still have humans behind it who are training it, who are updating it with the most up-to-date information and working together with it, right? That's another big thing I think that we kind of take for granted with AI, is that it is a tool for our toolbox that we use, and I feel like we need to work more together with it as a pair. And again, it's a force multiplier. I think we've said that term several times while talking about AI. But what do you think?
I think that you make a really good point there. And having the people, it gets back to my statement, right? That AI enables people more. It does not replace people. Again, not yet. I do think maybe someday we'll get to the point where we have robots. I think we'll see it in our lifetime, where we have humanoid robots that can provide basic aid for certain things.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of things like helping with man, I am ready for the robot that can actually fold laundry, right?
Yeah.
Do dishes, stuff like that.
Oh, God.
Yeah, basic things like that. I think we will see that. I think we'll be old, which thankfully they'll show up when you and I are old, but then we'll have to rent them because there'll be no such thing as ownership, and we'll that's a whole other ball of wax. Man, feeling a little frosty today, bud.
I know. No, I think we both are, and it's
been a long week. I'm ready for the long weekend.
Yeah, a long week with a long weekend coming up, which is great. Yeah. Look, I mean, go ahead.
Do you think, I mean, with the ability to take these and subvert them, do you think, well, no, before I get to that, I do want to talk about Sorry. I'm going to ask you a two-part question, because a lot of these algorithms and the AIs behind them do create echo chambers on purpose. Do you think the average person wants to break out of that, or do you think they're fine with what's being created by these algorithms? And for those people who aren't fine with it, do you think performing some poisoning is the appropriate response?
Anecdotally, what I've noticed is that people like their echo chambers. If you are a fan of the right, then you're on Twitter and Truth Social. If you're a fan of the left,
Threads.
then you're on Threads and Blue Sky, right? And unfortunately, both of those
Ain't
aren't.
nobody on Parler anymore, though.
Yeah, that's right.
Because if you were, everyone could see it, as we learned from the insurrection.
That's right. Unfortunately, that divides us more, right? That has us dig more into our idea of what is right and what is wrong, right? And those are somewhat subjective depending on what the situation is, right? And if you don't hear new ideas and you don't hear other people's opinions, then everything kind of tends to get lost, right? As far as who you are, why you have that idea you have, and where you're going with it. So I think the answer is that people they like that. I think in general, we as human beings like that. We like things that are like us, right? It just makes sense. Habit, right? And we all have habits, and we like to stick to them, and we like to continue sticking with them. That's what habit is. But also, that transcends into like our biases and our belief systems, and we like to be around people. If you go to a specific church and you're part of a specific denomination, you like to hang out with the people who believe in the same thing you believe in. It's not true for everybody. But I think we are creatures of habit, and I think we like to have that reinforced.
I agree with you, especially because I think with that reinforcement, most people say, I just want to be happy. But what they really mean is they just want to be comfortable, right? But then when you get to that level with these echo chambers, the engagement isn't there if you just feel comfortable, right? I think what a lot of people want more than comfort, and they'll sacrifice their comfort for this, is to feel right.
Yes.
And that gets them really, really going. And really, when they're right, then they have a reason to exist. And then for some people, I'm not saying everyone, then it's not enough just to be right. They want to be right, and others must be wrong, and they need to help identify the others. And they're miserable at this point, right? They're no longer comfortable, but it's fueling more than the comfort. It's the feeling right and just, and finding the wrong, and then making sure the wrong people feel wrong. It's a bit, that's the part that unsettles me with that echo chamber element. Which is why I can see, and I am not supporting, I don't condone or any of this, but I can understand why people would want to poison their own footprint, right? When it comes to these algorithms and AIs and so forth. Some people just want to be left alone and want to avoid that altogether. And I think I would not necessarily fault someone by default for doing that. But I answered your question rather than waiting.
No, that's fine. I mean, I totally agree. I think that, I think you and I have both noticed that there's a very particular group of people who tend to be in a particular generation who really like AI in a certain light. They like that it says yes and please. They like that it is a very kind word, that it tends to reinforce their beliefs or reinforce what they were thinking.
And on the kind part, I think there's a lot of lonely people out there that just want something nice said to them, which there's many, I'm sure most people know now, but there's a big epidemic of loneliness, especially amongst young men. And they just want to hear someone say something nice to them. And it's sad to an extent, but then it also gets a little enabling. There's a lawsuit going on right now where parents are suing OpenAI because their son started with basic homework questions and then compliments, and then used it to understand how to perform the worst type of self-harm and receive support from the AI. So it's a very tricky, the devil's in the details there, right? It's very tricky in handling there. So I can kind of understand the desire to mislead. Sorry, again, I keep interrupting you. I'm being rude, bro.
No, you're not. You're not. And look, it's kind of funny because I feel like we have turned from the legitimate cybersecurity podcast into the legitimate social issues podcast. But
cyber social. There we go.
Part of technology is especially technology such as this, which is basically a social tool, because we are talking about LLMs again. Agentic AI aside, even that is somewhat based on LLM technology. We are talking about LLMs, which means we're talking about something that can, a computer that can actually talk with us and communicate, right, on a higher level than we've ever really been able to communicate with our digital world before. And so, sorry everybody listening for the kind of social commentary here, but it
I'm not. If you don't like it, don't listen.
it's something as technologists that we really do have to start taking into consideration. And if you're sitting there and we're like, well, I'm just an IT guy and I just kind of wanted to break into cybersecurity and I wanted to learn about your guys' world, guess what? Mine and Frank's world has been completely bombarded by AI questions for the past year and a half, 2 years, maybe 3 years.
And there's other videos for them too. They can watch those. Check out the other stuff on our channel.
We do have the other stuff.
We tell you what certs to get.
But these are serious questions that this isn't just for C-suite. This isn't just for executives. This isn't just for senior directors. This is for everybody throughout an organization to question the capabilities of these technologies, whether it's worth it or not, and how you want to use it. And you as a technologist, you as an IT person, you as a cybersecurity practitioner, this is part of your job, is to ensure that you're educating and that you're, educating, but also being open-ended about it. Like Frank and I are sharing opinions right now because we have them. We all have opinions, right? If we were talking to a client, it might go a little bit differently, right? Because we would reserve judgment, we would listen, and we would help guide them as best as we can as far as making a secure and a ethical decision on whether they should adopt the technology, how they should adopt the technology, what policies and procedures they should put in place of the technology to keep it safe.
Real fun stuff, guys. Really gets you going. It gets you out of bed every day.
I got to be honest, when it comes to stuff like this, it is absolutely fascinating. And look, we've had disagreements with our clients before. We've had disagreements with guests on the show with how they think AI should be used.
We've even disagreed with each other from time to time.
I disagree with that. I don't think we can disagree on a regular. But look, this is, as a technologist, I know that you're not used to being ambassadors so much as we have been in the past 3 years to the true social impacts that a lot of the AI technologies are now starting to have. And so, yeah, we're not having discussions with the CISO of an organization about whether an LLM is going to try to talk one of their employees into committing fraud yet. I guess I should say yet. But these ethical concerns, these issues still pop up. Sorry, I don't know why I felt like I needed to justify why.
No, I think it's important. No, that you don't have to justify anything you say on this. I mean, our dozens of listeners are really might get angry.
Everybody stopped listening 20 minutes ago.
I know. It's true. Well, if you look at the stats, some of them did. Anyway, I agree. I agree with you in that part that we spent a lot of time discussing these and explaining these to clients. The thing that kind of gets me from time to time is we're helpless to make meaningful change. Any single individual is. I mean, we can give recommendations. We can make meaningful changes for our recommendations for change for ourselves, for our clients. But I think overall, as a society and as a culture, there's not much we can do except, watch the inevitable happen. And I'm not even sure I know what the inevitable is. But regardless of what you or I can say or do, algorithms do shape our news, our jobs, our health, our relationships. And I think we're kind of back at the start of the discussion. We just have to decide if we're okay with that. And by the way, if YouTube recommended this episode to you, maybe the algorithm proved our point a little bit.
Yeah.
Who knows? Or
maybe you're deeply disturbed.
No. None of our fans are disturbed. We have amazing fans, the best fans. Anyway, thank you, Dustin, for your time again, as always. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Meet us again back next week for another episode where maybe we'll find something a little more exciting, happier to discuss.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about cyber, I think.
Maybe we'll become a video game review show. Who knows? Anyway, until then, stay safe and have a great week.